Podcast 411, Item 241, March 5th, 2026. Dan Granger, CEO, Oxford Road, and host of the Media Roundtable podcast.
Podcast411.com. Listen different.
Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Rob, and this is the Podcast 411 podcast. Before we get into the interview with Dan, first, a news item. Podcast Movement has announced their dates and location for their main show later this summer. It will be in New York City, and it will be broken out into two groups of days. So September 14th and 15th will be the Sounds Profitable Business Summit. This will be, according to Pod News, quote, a premium executive level experience built for podcast industry leaders, senior decision makers, and brand and agency media buyers. Across two focus days, the Sounds Profitable Business Summit will feature carefully selected keynotes, panels, and speaking opportunities with limited availability to drive discussions on the business of podcasting, group sessions and workshops that promote strategic conversations shaping the future of audio and creator-led media, curated networking designed to drive real partnerships and deals, fully catered breakfast, lunches, and dinners with seating charts built to optimize networking connections, unquote. Then on September 16th will be a break for the IAB Upfront, and then later that evening will be an industry party that will be sponsored by Locked On Podcast Network and others. That will be at Terminal 5. Then on September 17th and 18th will be the traditional podcast movement, quote, Podcast Movement is intended for a mix of attendees ranging from hobbyists interested in growing the skills to creator entrepreneurs scaling their multi-platform media brands. An audience of podcast networks, publishers, and creators will find relevant sessions and conversations throughout the event. Session submissions will be voted on by the podcast industry for the opportunity to appear on stage, ensuring that all panels and speakers are relevant to the intended audience. Over 2 days, Podcast Movement will deliver tactical panels with actionable insights, vendor showcases with hands-on opportunities, networking events built to support creators at every stage, unquote. I look forward to seeing folks at Podcast Movement in September in New York City. And now to the generic call of action. As always, your feedback is greatly desired. Give us a call, 206-666-4357. That's 206-MOM-HELP. Or send that feedback or your show's promo to podcast411@gmail.com. Again, today's episode, we have an interview with Dan Granger, CEO of Oxford Road and host of the Media Roundtable podcast. Without further ado, here we go. Dan, welcome to the show.
Glad to be here.
All right. First question. What was the first podcast you ever listened to?
Yeah, the reality is I have no idea. It was probably Leo Laporte because I was a seller, local seller at KFI 640 AM talk radio in Los Angeles. Leo was a weekend host, did a tech show that was nationally syndicated, and he came out to spend time with the sales team. Came down from Petaluma, and he was willing to go on a sales call to a Chevy dealer with me. We got there was no meeting. They canceled it, but it gave me a chance to sit in LA traffic for about 3 hours with Leo Laporte in probably 2004. And if you think about Leo Laporte in 2004, prognosticating and giving me like the full picture of the future, which he was already starting to live in, that was very transformative for my understanding of what was to come. And so I probably heard his show first. Certainly, I think the shot heard around the world was when Corolla started doing his show online. Those were some of the early, more influential programs that I was involved with.
Yeah, Leo definitely helped bring legitimacy in the early days to podcasting. The very beginning. So it was great having him in the space. Today, any podcasts that you listen to on a regular basis? Any guilty pleasures?
No, guilty pleasures. Yeah, anything comedy, anything interview. I mean, I'd listen all day. The reason I got into this whole space was I do love to listen. Sadly, I don't listen nearly as much as I would like to. And most of my listening is done for a purpose because I'm going to be talking to somebody or I'm working on a campaign or something that is related to the business. So listening for pleasure is very rare for me these days. When I do, I like my news from Mo News. I like to get two sides of things. So I'll sometimes go to Pivot and then to All In because I know I'm going to get the full picture between those two. And so I like to bounce things off of each other. And that's one of the beautiful things about this medium is you can kind of get all the different perspectives on a thing. But normally it's people that are either going deep into something that is learning or history. I kind of stay in the nonfiction world, whether it's reading or listening.
All In is my top one right now as well. I've been listening since it was 3 on the left and 1 on the right. Now it's the other way.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, how things have turned, right?
So you have a podcast at Oxford Road. Before we get into Oxford Road, let's talk about Media Roundtable. Talk a little bit about why you're doing a podcast.
It felt a little strange that we didn't have one for a long time. I love the medium so much. And, I think that part of it for me was that I wanted to be more involved and do something like Media Roundtable, but I really wouldn't give myself permission for a long time. I kind of felt like that's for people that are dedicating themselves to that. And I've dedicated myself to the commercial side, right? But over time, like the more kind of prominent we got in the space, I started thinking about it more and going, I wonder if there's a way that this could be a benefit to our clients, to the industry, and that it wouldn't just be a hobby for me, even though it might feel like one sometimes. And then the real inciting event was I turned 40, and right when the pandemic hit right after that, and what a great midlife crisis to start a podcast. There's so many worse ways to, try something new. And so what happened was I saw the world kind of going crazy. And I thought, well, this would be an interesting experiment to use a podcast to explore a real felt issue that I think we were all dealing with, at least in this industry. So the real genesis of the Media Roundtable was to talk to people that worked in the business, not just podcasting specifically, but in media, and start with the question, how did we get so divided? What is media's culpability in this? And what is the advertiser's culpability in this? Because what we found ourselves in the beginning of the pandemic was a time that advertisers were really being held accountable for the content that they supported. There were new rules. Nobody knew what those rules were. They weren't written anywhere. There's just a lot of reaction. And I was really concerned, confused, frustrated by the way that I saw that playing out. And I thought, what if we just did like an open lab approach to trying to get to the bottom of this problem? And boy, what a transformative experience for me. And I think it had some great benefits for the business. And I hope some even for the industry, because it led me on a journey of getting beyond like, are you for or against cancel culture, which was kind of the binary way that people were looking at things. But it was a way that I got to talk to people left, right, and center, executives, politicians, creators, you name it. We were able to talk to some really fascinating people. And it led me to the belief that we all draw lines somewhere in what type of content we're willing to affiliate ourselves with. And advertisers are no different. And what advertisers really need, and I think the ultimately consumers need, is they need a grid. They need some sort of data to inform what they're actually consuming, sort of the same way that we have nutrition labels on food. I think that that's what the future of an open internet looks like if it's going to be unrestricted by the government, which I hope. I'm a big believer in free speech, but you can't have advertisers going in cold, not knowing what they're affiliating with. Now, the hard part about that is how do you legislate for that objectively without getting your own bias involved in it? How do you not well, maybe you can't. Maybe you can't. I think you can't do it
Look in
perfectly.
Europe, what's going on there?
Yeah.
I mean, I know I'm a free speech absolutist. I understand that advertisers don't want to get attached with certain things, but when you have the government involved with it, let the market dictate. Don't let the government.
Well, I'm with you on that. But what I noticed was the market was being very reactive. And, the third time I had somebody, it was interesting. So, for example, I don't take political positions. I don't think anybody cares what I have to say about who's in office. But fortunately for me, I'm not super crazy about anybody these days. And, but I will tell you, like, I have relationships with people that are on the right and on the left. The Midas Touch brothers, have been very good friends to me and to the agency. So is Ben Shapiro. And, I'm in the bridge building business. And after I got the third phone call with somebody canceling their sponsorship of Ben Shapiro, who had been advocating for them for 3 years or, longer, and a partner to their business. And I said, well, why are we canceling this? And it was simply, well, because of what he was affiliated with and not because of anything he had specifically done or said. I said, we need to be better informed when making these decisions. Advertisers need something. The hard thing in all of this is finding a way to give them information from a third party that doesn't have a political agenda. And so that became a bit of a passion project for me. We made investments in a number of different companies who were trying to solve this problem. I don't know that anybody's done it perfectly, but we've gone as far as even in the last year, we have patented taxonomies that hopefully are able to have objective weights and measures so that you can evaluate not just politics, but even things like comedy and look at that through a different lens than you might look at a news program and look at news in a different way that isn't based on whether or not you like what they're saying or what their opinion is. Ultimately, in news, for example, the big common denominator, you're not going to get people to agree on what misinformation is. But what you can do is identify how much people are personally attacking other people in their content. And I don't care what side of the aisle you're on. If you're an advertiser and I'm representing you, you should know what you're getting yourself into if there's hostility being used and personal attack being used in the way that somebody makes a point. And I think that can be objectively measured. There are correlations between how reliable and well researched and objective the data you're presenting is and how personal your arguments are versus just leaning on the strength, the merits of your arguments. There's things for news, there's things for comedy, there's things for true crime. True crime is great. What a wonderful genre. How great has it been for this category? And how many people love it and enjoy listening to it? And here's a question. You're talking about real people. And are you talking about it in a way that is exploitative of their pain? And are we monetizing that? Or is there a piece of it that is trying to be restorative? Is there a justice motive? Are there crimes being solved? And in many cases, there are. We don't often get visibility into this. And if you're sponsoring, you don't have a clue unless you're going to sit there and listen to everything, think about it, and come up with your own taxonomy. So for me, one of the most wonderful things about doing a podcast, just kind of bringing it all back around, is that we live in a complex world that has gotten increasingly complex with the fragmentation of media. And what I love about this medium is that I believe it is the greatest canvas for the free and open exchange of ideas, but that has to be managed responsibly. And the tools to do so, in many cases, don't yet exist. And actually, by doing a podcast, I think we're able to bring ourselves closer to discovering those things by talking to people and by learning and listening and getting new perspectives. So that was a big part of it. And then in recent years, just to land the plane, not everything's all about polarization and brand safety and suitability. We do a lot of industry commentary these days, and we're a little bit more topical than we used to be. But that was the essence and the DNA of it. And for me, it was invigorating as well as I think productive.
One of the things on brand safety, I remember all the early tools when we were looking at them, history podcasts got zinged because they talked about war and they're like getting pinged. And I'm like, wait a second, this is some of the safest content you can be on. just because they happen to talk about the Punic
It was
Wars.
dumb tech. It was dumb tech. I mean, in some cases, if you remember GARM, Global Advertisers for Responsible
it was
Media, right?
horrible. Yeah.
Okay, well, let me tell you something. When GARM was a newer idea for this medium, I thought it might be a good idea. We tried that. We worked with people who ran that through machine learning, AI, whatever. Well, what we found out was that they were asking all the wrong questions. And I stood in front of the IAB before they shut it down and said, this is a bad system and it's actually not doing the job you're hiring it for. And I think a lot of it, sometimes it's because there's some design flaws and bias baked into that. That's always going to be in the
It was
cake
very
as well.
biased. Yeah, GARM was really biased.
But honestly, you'd be amazed from having actually worked under the hood on some of this stuff. The bigger issue was just the tech wasn't there. Now the good news is if you know how to instruct it, you can feed in a transcript today. I mean, what it can do, as of Tuesday of this week versus what it could do 18 months ago is night and day, right? And so I do think context is making things like labeling more viable, but it's sort of like with AI, if you look at some of the controversies that are happening and why Anthropic is doing so well, one of the reasons is because they're really being deliberate in trying to think about what are you training this off of, and are you training it off of the right stuff? I mean, there's real philosophy and debate happening behind the scenes with this and with brand safety. As much as anything else, I really think it's a delicate thing. I know we're kind of deep in the weeds right now on this topic, but
that's this podcast.
you hit a nerve with that one. That one's one of my favorite.
Yeah, no, early on,
really important.
Yeah, GARM had a lot of issues, and yeah, well, I'll leave it at that. I railed about it in the past, so I'll pull back. Let's pull out of Media Roundtable and to Oxford Road, and just for those who don't know the history of Oxford Road, can you just bring us up a little bit on that, including if you remember who the first advertiser you had for a podcast was?
Oxford Road, we're an ad agency, plain and simple. And there was a time where I think that there were a lot of people that came out of talk radio endorsements. Where what was interesting about talk radio endorsements was I think that was truly the first influencer medium where the medium and the message really converged, where you're not just buying space to tell somebody or hiring a celebrity to come into a space and talk about something, but people are there to hear from X, and X is actually telling you. And I know we saw early versions of that with Lucky Strike hours and stuff like that, but this was a little different where there was an authenticity to it. And so those of us that came out of that business, and I was in sales for 10 years and built a team that was kind of simulating an ad agency, but our only tool was these endorsements for a few hosts on really a single station. We dabbled in a few other stations, but it's really about one single radio station and getting personalities to drive product sales. And I grew up in the business doing that at a time where podcast was nascent and D2C brands were nascent. So it really started to hit. We talked about Corolla. I think when Corolla jumped in, that's when things started getting more commercial. That's when you actually started seeing ads. And we didn't do the first podcast ad. We can't take credit for that. There was Pro Flowers, there was Stamps, there was a few of them. They were all doing affiliate deals, right? We got in early because it was very organic for us to go to our radio clients and say, hey, here's a new medium. It's kind of an extension of the same thing, but lower commitment, closer to the point of purchase. So we started dabbling in probably 2011 commercially. I think the first company that we put in a show was Auto Shepherd, which doesn't exist today. We put them in the Adam Carolla show, and we really got to measure it separately. And we saw that this is not like other channels. And we took LegalZoom, who is a longtime client on terrestrial radio, put them on terrestrial radio in 2004. By 2011, it was time to try a new medium. Dollar Shave Club, Hulu. By the time we had Hulu was brand new, and we started placing them in podcasts. Well, I didn't really have an ad agency. And one of the guys over there, Arlen, he said, you really need to start an agency. And like, well, I got this day job. And he's like, if you do it, we'll be your client. And he signed an MSA agreement with us before I even had paperwork on what became Oxford Road. So 2011, 12, 13, we went from kind of experimentation to this thing really started exploding. And we could see that there was something different in it. And we kind of rode the wave. So launched the business in 2013, rode the wave of the D2C revolution with the Dollar Shave Clubs and the ZipRecruiters and the Blue Aprons. Those were all clients we brought to the medium. At the same time, the podcast was in its infancy, but starting to be viable commercially. And so we did that for 11 years, grew the business substantially. And then in 2024, we actually found a partner, Insignia Capital. And with them, we were able to combine our business with Veritone One, which was a subsidiary of Veritone Inc. And together, combine it to not just be the largest buyer of podcast media in the world, among other channels that we work in, but really, the main thesis was that specialists can outperform generalists in the advertising business. And what would happen if you had the scale of a holding company applied to this medium, and what could you unlock? And that was the core thesis behind us coming together. And, now we're doing it, and we're off to the races, and we're having a lot of fun.
And then for those that don't know that are listening, Veritone One at one point in time had acquired Performance Bridge. So the history now goes all the way back to 2005.
We have a rich history from ROI Media becoming Veritone One and combining with Performance Bridge and Steven Smick and Zeus Kalousis and Patrick Lennon and, some real kind of titans of our industry that came together. And I'm grateful to be in the line of succession here with these guys. A lot of talented folks put this together.
Yeah, I've known Steven since 2005. So yeah, great guy.
Incredible guy.
Yes.
Incredible guy.
Speaking of advertising, I'll get into one of these. One of the topics is, what are your thoughts on baked-in ads versus now faked-in ads? So there's a lot of people that are having people record the ads separate and then using DAI to fake it in. Have you measured ROI versus the two? Because you guys measure a lot. Have you taken a look at that?
Let me ask you a question. If it's a baked-in ad or a baked-in ad, but nobody knows the difference, does it matter?
You know the difference. I mean, if you listen to Joe Rogan, you listen to Ben, you know when it's a faked in and when it's a baked in. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you hear it, you know it. As a listener, you know it. So there's got to be some. Now, there's sometimes you may not know for sure, but there's other times where the baked in ad the content rolls right into the ad and then comes right out of the ad. And that was well done.
So for a long time, for years, anytime I'd have a chance to talk publicly, I would say my closing line would be "Save the live reads," and we never actually printed the shirts, but it was a bit of a rallying cry for us because it was an endangered species.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the allure of programmatic had a lot of people saying like, "This is going the way of the dodo," and this whole feature of live ads and programming is going away, and that always troubled me because it's always been the core of my business. I think that those of us that came out of radio come with the incumbent advantage of having seen a lot of this shit before. And, when we were when it was terrestrial radio, I had a live read unit that went for a price. I had a produced ad where the host pre-recorded the endorsement, but it was still an endorsement. That went for a slightly lower price. And then there was an ad that didn't have the host at all, and that went for a much lower price. And there's a reason that the economics were established that way. And I think the punchline on all this. I try not to be too rigid and too much of a purist because we all got to deal in this crazy reality we live in. And if I could wave the wand, they would all be organic, pure organic, baked in live reads, stitched in ads that live forever and ever. Amen. But good luck with that. So I think the best I can do is try to champion the merits of being as close to pure as you can. And that is like the most pure, unfiltered, unadulterated advertisement you can ever get, is that baked in live read. But you can't get it that much. You can't get it everywhere. And they are now dedicated to being able to carve them out, even if you think you're getting it baked in. So we do the best we can. What works better? What's closest to which one's closest to the whole? It's the live read, but you can't necessarily engineer everything around that. So I think the pricing, which one works better technically, is a pound for pound, an impression that is live beats an impression that is pre-recorded. However, because you're going to buy it cheaper when it's pre-recorded, it's not always a straight line to say, well, your performance will be better if you do that because you pay a lower price sometimes. So anyway, long-winded answer. I agree with the sentiment and the spirit of where you're coming from, but
when I talk to producers, they would rather just do the live read when they're doing the episode. And the ones that are now doing video, they're like, I have to do it live, right? And now you want me to cut it out, and then on the audio side, but it's in the video, I can't cut it out because I want to get it up on YouTube, right? It's got to be there. So there's all kinds of issues now that come for people that are doing the simulcast.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. When you're corporate enough that you've got somebody managing your yield, it's a whole different thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And again, I know you guys measure a lot, so I was just curious where you were on that.
Yeah.
You have done some live events in the past.
So have we?
Well, you did.
I'm teasing you.
Okay.
I'm teasing you. Yeah, no, we've been doing live events. Yeah.
So I was going to ask, what live events are you going to be doing in 2026? What do you have planned for 2026, both attending and running?
Okay, so attending, I'm going to go to On Air Fest. I think that Ashley does a nice job with that. I'm probably going to see what Possible is, just because there's so much hype. I'll probably go back to Cannes. So we're getting out there with some of those, but it almost feels like a fiduciary duty to participate in podcast movement. And the work that the IAB does just went to their big kickoff in Palm Springs, but then the upfronts, I think, are also important. So, we try to be at all of them. If not me, somebody from our team will be there. I don't know how much you know about the concept that we came out with a few years ago for our kind of own proprietary brand of event.
Right.
I think we saw, I guess I'll give you a little more backstory because it's a podcast. I had a friend who is a former client talk me into joining as an interim part-time CMO of his business while being the CEO of Oxford Road. This was back in 2022.
You just had too much sleep, I guess.
It was profoundly challenging for any notion of self-care or work-life balance or harmony in the home. Let's put it that way. I don't recommend two of these gigs at once because neither of them are a cakewalk. But anyway, it was a temporary thing, and it was fun to be a part of, and business was growing. And for a season, I think I got an MBA in what it is to be on the other side of this thing. And it was a chance to let my team spread their wings a little bit and not have me all over them so much. And so I thought just that, to kind of remove me a little bit for a minute, was probably a healthy thing for the system. But when I kind of came back after that gig, I looked around and I said, okay, like, physician, heal thyself. How are we marketing ourselves here? And who is our customer? And our customer really was all over the map. It might be the founder of a business. It might be a CMO. It might be somebody very junior at a publicly traded company. It's just, there was no title for it. So I said, okay, what have we started? But like, this, it's a funky medium. It's got its own set of rules. It's not just advertising, right? Like, it's advertising, but it's also a bunch of other things, and it's got its own language and its own nuance. And there are marketers, whatever their title, who really understand it or want to understand it and invest in it. And these are the people that have built the industry. It is the people that said, I'm going to figure out how to measure this thing that is really hard to measure. And I just believe in it. And it's like a lot of it's propelled by passion, right? Just same as the listeners. And so, but those people, there's not really a training ground for them, and there's not really a place for them to talk to each other, unless they're going to show up at one of these other events and just get mobbed by salespeople, of which I once was. And so,
Mhm.
no shame in that. But like, so the first thing we did was, so I said, well, let's come up with a little club, like a little fight club, and we'll call it Chief Audio Officer and CAO for short. And we went to a couple publishers and said, hey, do you mind hosting a conversation where we're just going to invite a bunch of marketers to come peer to peer and talk to each other? And so first one we did was at Spotify in New York, and we had like 25 marketers all sitting in a circle, and it was like group therapy. How you dealing with, all the challenges and attribution? How you dealing with, how do you deal with talent? What, they're not showing up to onboarding calls like they used to, and you found out that people had a lot of the same pain points, and they really valued getting to hear from each other. So anyway, that snowballed. We ended up doing what we call the CAO Summit. We now have completed 3 of them annually in LA every year. And right now, that's about 75 brands that all come together. Either they're kind of expert level or they're trying to become expert level, but they're pretty established and serious about the medium. And, even how we define that is shifting, which we can talk about. But it's beautiful. We went to Terranea last year, and it was about a 2-day event. We've had amazing talent come in, whether it's Dana Carvey and David Spade, Ashley Flowers. We had Ben Shapiro and Stephen Bartlett share the stage last year. But that's just kind of the window dressing. It's really about the brands talking to each other about how to solve problems, and we facilitate that. And so I think it's been a winning formula. I think the marketplace has really needed a place for people to educate each other on this and really learn how to make it work, because it's hard and it doesn't come automatically. And even with a good agency, sometimes you need some relationships in the business. So that's been a big thing. And we also have a version of that we do in the fall around Adweeky time when people are doing upfronts. It's a little more transactional, less about just learning, more about like, okay, how do we do some deals in a real way? Not as many deals as at most upfronts as you might think. So we try to have some of our own kind of secret sauce to break through that. But then the cool thing that's new that's this year that I'll tell you about, because I think you're going to drop this right before it happens,
Mhm.
is we're going to South by, and we're doing a few different things. We're partnering with Podcast Movement Evolutions, and we've got a lounge for meetings and stuff like that, and we've got some panels and that sort of thing. But what's really new that we're just starting this year is we're actually throwing our hat in the ring to produce a new awards ceremony. And the awards ceremony that we're doing is to honor independent podcasters and creators, because I think that you'll see maybe that may be a category at an award show, and I know we've got a few different award shows, and it's not to take away from any of them, but I really believe, and I know you believe this too, that the heart of this industry is about independence. And look, most people go corporate if they can, right? And there's not necessarily shame in that, and kudos to those that can but don't. Most do if they can, right? But without the independence, you don't get a Joe Rogan, you don't get an Ashley Flowers. Like everybody, I say everybody, but most people who are successful in this business, they started out just kind of doing it out of their trunk or their garage or whatever, or their spare office. And I think we need to honor those people. I think we need to give them more attention and encouragement. And I think that as this industry gets more corporate, we really need to keep the spotlight on the people that are the next generation and make sure that they're getting on people's radars. If you work with a big company to buy your ads in this business, you're probably going to miss a lot of the independence. And for us, they're really the soul of the whole thing. I don't ever want to lose focus on that, however big we get. I think that like I got into this really driven by passion as much as anything else for the medium. And I think this is going to be a great chance to really start to build I don't look at it like we're building an agency so much as an institution and trying to impact the ecosystem that we work in. And I think this is a real deposit in that bank.
So what are the awards called? And is it the awards happening or being announced? What's happening at South by?
Well, what's happening is we made the call probably, well, just imagine that we fired the starting gun 6 weeks before they're going to happen. And everyone around me that's helping with this hates me right now. But it's also the mother of invention, and I know that. And so having this kind of forced deadline to get it off the ground, we've been talking about it for a long time. But what better place and time than South by? So we're actually going to hold them this year. It's going to be on Sunday night or late afternoon at the Sounds Profitable Podcast Movement Evolution space, whatever you want to call it. And we have our jury selected. We have a very prestigious jury panel, and we have a number of, I think we have 10 jury categories. We have a prize that is purely based on our, as a company, selection. There's total bias in that one. The jury piece, we're trying not to be biased and not just to pick our favorites or our friends, but we're trying to go through a pretty legitimate process in that. And then we have something called the Orbit Awards, which is based on performance for advertisers. And who wants to, like, is it really interesting to consumers to know who drives the most ad response? Probably not, but I actually think it's probably the most accurate bellwether for cultural influence that you'll be able to see is who moves the needle with their audience to actually adopt an in-market behavior that you can kind of see and quantify. It's a new concept. I think we've got some pretty meaningful names involved, and just a lot of excitement about what this is going to represent. And just in the spirit of doing it, like she's going to kill me for this, but my wife, who's actually a great artist, is hand making the awards.
Nice.
Because and I say that not just to plug her, but because I think that's really what we're trying to do here, which is not something that is not super corporate and not factory made. And so look, we're gonna screw a lot up, I'm sure, in the launch, but I'm really excited about what we're building.
So you can have a category, maybe like the best host read ad read.
No, that's actually not one of the categories, believe it or not. And we are going to acknowledge some of the sponsors who have made the biggest investment in the medium for independence, because they are really the kind of patrons of the arts, and we're going to recognize a few of them as well. But in terms of the ad piece is one section. Most of it is not, but the part that is most heavily influenced by ads is really about who truly gets the best pure performance. And then there's another one for who has the most quantitative performance, so like the most volume of response. And then there's another one for momentum, basically trajectory for a newer program. So yeah, and that's separate from the jury awards, which are things that you would expect, like comedy and narrative and stuff like that. Yeah, it's a big undertaking.
Per host read ads, what level of downloads per episode do you see advertisers willing to go down to? At one point, it was anything, and then it went to 5K and 10K and 20K. When you see advertisers today, what are they looking for a minimum size for a show? And I know it does vary if it's a female audience versus a mixed audience, but typically.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think when you're under 50,000 impressions an episode, it's hard to get people to pay attention. That's the reality. And are there brands that'll really take the time to evaluate the long tail and go down to the 20, 10, and 5? Yeah, they're out there, but fewer and fewer. And for better or for worse, I think that a lot of the momentum in this business is shifting toward more of a winner take all model. I'm not saying that's a good thing, but when you have an industry that has gone, past the $1 billion mark, and now we're talking billions of dollars in revenue, you're talking about a lot of institutional capital. Like, it favors the 80-20 rule starts to apply. Now, I think we're trying to champion that long tail as best we can, but there is an equation somewhere where you have to say, well, how much time can you spend in your day procuring, managing an authentic relationship with a host who falls below a certain threshold?
I know that's always been an issue. I mean, if it takes you just as much time to find the time codes and listen and make sure they've done the host read right for a show that's 150 versus a show that's 15,000, you're doing 10 times the work just to get to 150 with, the 50 shows. And I get that. So that leads to the next point is then everybody's trying to get up to that 50K, right? And there's all these services that are promising organic growth and sign up and we're going to grow your show, yada, yada, yada. Per promoting a podcast, have you seen anything that works for podcasts for actual growth that keeps the ROI for the advertisers? It's irrelevant what the downloads are if they're bogus and there's no ROI.
You're asking, what do I believe is effective in promoting the listenership of a show?
Yeah, growing a show.
I'm probably not great at this, or we'd have a lot more people consuming the Media Roundtable podcast. And so I say that with as much humility as I can muster. I'll just use our show as an example. I don't need it to have a large audience. I needed to have a dedicated audience. And what astounds me is how many people in our industry pay attention to what we have to say and what we're saying through our show. If you stop thinking about it like it's got to pay the bills through advertising and think about it more like the way you would think of a company newsletter, but hopefully a good one, I think that sometimes we put too much pressure on that download metric or that impression metric. In terms of if you're in that game and you're going to live off of the ad revenue, I don't know that you can. Somebody said this to me recently, and I think I agree with it. They say, if you're already established, you can probably just do a good show and people will find you, with your RSS feed and all that. There used to be ways to game it with feed swaps and Apple charts and all that. But today, let's be honest, you got to work YouTube. You got to play the algorithms. If you're trying to jolt it, if you're trying to do anything other than slow, steady, nurture your audience, engage with your audience, and spend time like rewarding them for their time, if you want to artificially accelerate it, then you better play the ponies and be good at it. Like, go the slot machine, whatever you want to call it. And there are people that are very, very good at that. I wouldn't call myself one of those people, although I know a few.
With ads, and we can skip this question if you don't want this, I can kind of edit all of it out. But with ads comes fraud. And I'm talking in all forms of media, right? Video ads are estimated 20 to 30% fraud. Host-read podcast ads are estimated to be just 5 to 10% on fraud. That's the lowest of all the mediums. What are you guys doing to look for fraud? Or is that something that you just put on the ad networks that you work with and let them work it out?
Well, we do a lot, and I don't mind you asking this question at all. We're pretty proactive, but I guess...
And by the way, thank you for answering, because there's a lot of people who want to put their head in the sand, and that's not the answer. That's not the solution ever.
So it's a fascinating discussion. I mean, it's kind of its own episode, but like, when you say fraud, which version do you mean? And I'll talk to you about what I think is like what are the main culprits and some of what we're doing there.
The fraud that I've seen is people just hiring someone out of Bangladesh or wherever it is. Fake promote, bogus downloads, VPN in to different cities in the US. I joke, you'd look at their numbers and they had 50,000 downloads in New York and they had 37,000 in Philly and they had 23,000 in Washington, D.C. and then they had 32 in Boston. And I'm like, even a Yankees podcast is going to do better than that in Boston. Right. So you can tell sometimes quickly.
You can smell the bullshit. Yeah. I mean, for that type of fraud, I think that's actually not the biggest threat that we face. And it comes out in the wash quickly for us because ultimately most of our business is performance business. And that's where you might fool us once. You might, but you're going to get it. And we're buying enough media that you're going to make it up if you screw with us. So that's less of a challenge. I will say we also just have some very we have some great guardians at the agency. Miranda Romano, you're not going to sneak anything by her. Courtney O'Connor, Hillary Schaefer, like you're not gonna snow these people and sell them a bill of goods. They're gonna look for the signs. They're gonna know the indicators, and it's gonna get caught. And so if somebody sneaks something through once in a while, they'll pay for it. So it's just an inconvenience temporarily. That's part one. You want to know where I think the real issue is all the impressions that aren't really impressions. I mean, why are we still talking about a download?
We fought on the IAB about what to call it and what to measure for many, many, many months. At the end of the day, it came back to a download because it was the least worst option.
Fine, but it's not an impression. And so I'm working very hard in kind of back rooms that I can't even publicly announce yet, but stick around. Give me maybe, I'm hoping 4 to 5 months. And I think we're going to get some uniformity around what an impression is, and that an impression should be something that somebody consumes and not an opportunity for exposure. Now, listen, in Europe, you can see opportunity for exposure sold as a metric. You can sell a newspaper impression based off circulation. But honestly, you get back to the question you asked earlier. It's like, does it really matter if nobody actually hears a thing or sees a thing? We're in the business of impact and influence. And there are people in this industry that are selling 10 impressions and only delivering one real impression. And there are a lot of them that are selling 10 impressions and only delivering 5. I think that what unfortunately this marketplace is built on today is taking a number that YouTube shows you and a number that Spotify shows you and a number that Apple shows you and stacking them all up and looking at your plays, your downloads, and your impressions and going, oh, that's all. Here's the CP. We're going to put a $25 CPM on that and packaging it like it's all the same product, and it is not. And so I think that's the real fraud. Couple people hyping up their shows so they can try to game the charts. They'll fool a couple people, but it comes out in the wash more easily. We've got a systemic problem that we got to solve to get standardized measurement in this business. And that's the problem that I'm really working on, among a few others.
But how do you deal with that when the consumption on the audio side is mostly in Apple? Forget what people say out there. It's mostly Apple, and then Spotify, and then there's nobody else. And Apple's not sharing the data.
Apple does share the data. They don't share it as easily as we might like them to. But I think we're moving into a period of time where I'll stand up for Google. How about that? And say that YouTube is actually a meaningful contributor. Now, we can talk about the legitimacy of the complaints about a YouTube impression versus
3 seconds versus a minute. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
A view is 3 seconds on YouTube. A download in podcasting is 1 minute.
But a download doesn't, like, how many downloads do you have on your phone that you never consume?
Oh, I know.
Right. So like, pick your poison here. I think that it's different. Listen, we just put out a study that said that an audio impression beats a video impression on performance from the data we're able to see. So I don't really have a dog in the fight. My dog is the advertiser, and that's really the only one that I care about. But I will say this, YouTube is a major factor in this business now. And it is different. It is not the same impression. You get a lot more easy come, easy go in your consumption. And some of this is conjecture on my part. But I do believe that it gives and it takes away, in that what it gives you is you can expose your content to more people more efficiently than any other platform right now. But it takes away in that exposure comes at the price of saliency and trust and like commitment, because when you have to go out of your way for an Apple play, you mean it when you're getting there, but it's harder to get at them. So like, I think you got to take them all in context, and I think they all are doing a job. But I think you're seeing us move into an era where everybody knows there's money here, and all the companies that matter need money and are money motivated. and they're seeing that people are pissed at all the schlep you got to do to try to figure out how to make it work in this channel. And I think they are more receptive now. They're kind of getting beaten into submission to an extent, to where I think they're sitting at the table and I think they're hearing everybody's cries. And I think all three of them are interested more than I've ever seen in trying to come up with something that's going to work for everybody. So, we're trying to meet people on their terms and trying to get them to the table. And I think they're coming in ways that I haven't seen before. And I'm happy about that. I'll see if I can show you anything real, but
My next question was about video and because that's all that people are talking about. And I was going to get through this rigmarole to get to the end and saying, do you think that someone who has audio only today needs to add video? Do they have to have video at this point? Because I hear some people say you have to have video.
First of all, I think making blanket statements like that, it doesn't feel right to me. I don't think I should tell you what you need to do. Because if Podcast 411 is designed to be an audio conversation, then God bless you. Use theater of the mind. It's a beautiful medium for that. At the same time, there's limitations and there's trades like we were talking about. And so I think that if you're in the business of promoting a show, you're probably going to have more levers at your disposal if you offer the camera, if you turn on the camera. So I turn on the camera. I don't always like what I see. When I see that I'm on, LinkedIn and my face is taking up the whole screen, I'm like, this is what happens when you let audio people, when you tell them they have to turn on the camera. But at the end of the day, like, to each his own. And I think there's a place for it. And where everybody screws up everything everywhere forever is they take a piece of data and then they throttle it as though that's the only information that exists. And I'm a big believer that the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. And for those that say no video, I'm an audio purist. I am not an audio purist. I believe audio is the heart of this. This is a conversation medium to me. But video can accelerate and video can accentuate and video can enhance if that's how you're designing your product. On the other hand, if you tell me that it's all video and you're dead without it, I say no. I think it's a lane on the highway. Oh, I really do. I think if you ask me to put my chips somewhere and I look at the freeway and I see 4 lanes and then a carpool lane, I'm like, audio's your carpool lane. Like, it's one of them and it needs to be respected and protected for people that are engineering content for that. But video is cheap enough. You're not going to kick it out. It's here. We're all living together now.
What I say to folks is, if your goal isn't to be 300,000 downloads per episode or 50,000, and you're fine with doing audio and you have a good audience, you don't need video. But if you want to be someone who's doing host read ads and you're in that top 0.5% of shows above 50K per episode, really, if you want to be above 300,000, I saw you have to have video above 300K per episode. 50 to 250, the data I looked at showed there was no statistical data to indicate that you had to have video in that 50 to 250K range. But above 300, everybody had video. If you're doing a true crime podcast and your production just doesn't work with video and you have a great audience, don't do video, right?
It might be better to have a static image and still have that distribution point.
Oh, yeah. You absolutely should have your content up on YouTube, even if it's just a static image. Absolutely. It's out of doubt. Yeah. And when I talk about video, I mean dynamic video, not a static image.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, because this will go up on YouTube. It'll have a static image for the episode, but it'll be up on YouTube.
Great. Well, I hope people enjoy listening to it.
Hey, one of my biggest episodes of all time was the one I did with Lore, with Aaron Mahnke for Lore, and I would put it up on YouTube. And at the time, it was right before Aaron's deal with Amazon Prime Video. Mm-hmm. And when it came out, everyone went on YouTube looking up who's Aaron Mahnke. And it was just my interview was like the only one on YouTube with Aaron at the time. So it had like 50,000 views over there for the static image.
No, I would just say, thanks for what you're doing and thanks for your long-term contribution to this industry, because you know what it was like and you know why you came here and the thing that keeps you engaged. And I think there's a lot of there's money, and so there's opportunism here. But I think there's a soul to it, and I think we need the old timers to stick around and tell the whippersnappers, about why it's so special, because it's a really unique medium we've gotten to be a part of, and it's not like anything I think the world's ever seen before. And as everything gets more and more artificial, I just think it's increasingly important. And so, so glad to be in the game with you.
Dan, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I really appreciate it.
All right. Have a good one.
Thanks again, Dan, for being a guest on the show. And please check out the links in the show notes for episode 241. Per the interview, we connected via Google Meet. I recorded the audio on my Zoom H6. I then combined both tracks via GarageBand, where I manually matched up the audio levels and did some background cleanup, and then exported the combined tracks and converted it to a .wav format file, and then uploaded it to Adobe Podcast and used the enhanced speech service with a 70% setting on speech and a 10% setting on background. I downloaded that file, dropped it into Levelator, and did the edits then after that in GarageBand. If you have any questions on that process or comments, email me, podcast411@gmail.com. Normally I'd have some news here, but I wanted to get this out since it had the breaking news in it about the podcast awards that are going to be at South by Southwest. So I wanted to get that up today, a week before South by Southwest starts. Per Where Have I Been? I will have that part. I was a guest on the Nice Guy on Business podcast. We talked podcasting and my new job with Dax and Captivate. Thanks, Doug, for having me on the show. There'll be a link to that in the show notes for the episode. Where am I going? I will be attending South by Southwest, and that will be next week. And if you would like to meet up with me on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, more likely Sunday because Friday and Saturday are pre-booked. But if you'd like to meet up with me at South by Southwest, please email me and let me know. For full and fair disclosure, while my day job is with Captivate, Dax US Global, the thoughts and opinions shared on this podcast are solely those of my own and my guests. They do not reflect the thoughts, opinions, or official positions of any other third parties. When quoting anything said on this podcast, please give attribution to Rob at Podcast 411 or to the guest per how their name appears in the title for this episode. This show is presented under a CC BY-SA license. Grok it if you're not sure what that is. Finally, don't forget to send in your feedback for anything said or that should have been said in this episode. You can record that feedback and email to me, podcast411@gmail.com, or you can call me, 206-MOM-HELP. That's 206-666-4357. Until the next time, ciao.